All right, guys, listen, this is a blues riff and B. Watch me for the changes and try and keep up, okay?
Virtually every kind of popular music we know today starts with sheet music. These seeds of blues, watered with the arrival of the recording industry, allowed the genres of music we know today to take root. At a young age, this tree of music split into three major branches: traditional blues, country blues, and urban blues. Urban, or city, is the branch from which we get most modern genres. Modern artists such as these employ the use of new instruments and technologies and integrated their personal styles with those that came before them. Their influence and ideas brought us to where we are today, a plethora of genres, one for every taste and style. Despite this abundance of styles, however, many artists are turning around and taking both an interest and a long, hard look at the roots from which they came. Here's where it all began. Although it's generally accepted that sheet music came before the recording industry, it should be noted that publisher Howard W. Odum made the first raw and non-commercial recordings in the early 1900s. However, these recordings have unfortunately been lost over the years. The year 1911 saw the first ever song published by a group of New York City publishers and songwriters called Tin Pan Alley. The song was entitled "Oh You Beautiful Doll." Despite the success, it is Hart Wan's Dallas Blues, published in 1912, that is considered the first true blues sheet music. This song was quickly followed by Baby Seals Blues and the Memphis Blues, which would later become the name of a major genre of city blues. Imagine the music you know without electricity, without bass, without drums. In many cases, an artist had only his voice and his hands. That was the music of the 20s, and it was all they needed to catch the attention of the recording companies. It was companies like the American Record Corporation, OK Records, and Paramount Records that made the first moves in recording African-American singers and allowed the genre to take root and finally catch the ears of music enthusiasts everywhere. The blues made its first recording breakthrough with the recording of an African-American singer in 1920. The song was Crazy Blues, performed by Mamie Smith. In 1923, Sylvester Weaver performed in the first slide guitar recording. This recording led to the Delta-style blues, which eventually turned into Mississippi blues and the more recent country genre. While the recording industry gave country music a head start, it was live performances that started the city branch. Take the raw sound of the blues, add a band, and you've got the makings of the 1930s. It wasn't nearly the same as it is today, however. They were called jug bands for a reason. Instruments of the first jug bands included the washtub bass, kazoo, washboard, spoons, the jug, and makeshift string instruments crafted from old guitar and mandolin necks fastened to dried gourds. Jug bands, along with ragtime piano music and early jazz, were coined city music because of their live gigs in local city clubs. This branch of city blues turned into what we call the Memphis Blues, but it didn't stay there for long. In the subsequent years, musicians began to upgrade their instruments and swap out their jugs and washtubs for brass and drums, in many cases never forgetting the good old piano and ragtime. In the late 30s and early 40s, musicians Jimmy Yancey and the Boogie Woogie trio of Albert Ammons, Pete Johnson, and Meade Lux Lewis mastered this mesh of instruments and pioneered, as their name suggests, the genre of boogie woogie. As the 40s progressed, bands added more and more players to their count, went almost entirely bass and brass, and created what we know today as the big band. For some, the big band was just too big, and artists such as Louis Jordan, Big Joe Turner, Roy Brown, and T-Bone Walker created smaller bands that brought the music as far as Missouri and California. They played an upbeat, small-time, big-sound version of the blues that became a major movement in genres known as jump blues. It was around this time that many musicians opened their eyes and set their sights north and headed to the big time, the beloved city of the God-sent Blues Brothers, the one and only Chicago. This mass movement was known as the Second Great Migration.
I'm gonna ask her, is
Eventually, the migration of the 40s led to the genre of Chicago blues. The experimentation of the artists of the time and place then led to the electric blues. Adding electricity to the mix led to the creation of the electric guitar, amplifiers, electric bass guitars, better microphones, and the miking of the harmonica. Artists like Little Walter, Sonny Boy Williamson, Big Walter Horton, and Willie Dixon mastered the art of the harmonica, or, as they would call it, the harp. In the late 50s, Chicago's West Side acquired its own sound. Curiously enough, it was named the West Side Sound. One of the biggest movements, however, was the rockabilly style of the early 1950s, which led to one of the most well-known genres, rock and roll.
got all my trouble in one big pack.
It wasn't long before the music in the US grabbed the attention of artists worldwide. In the late 1950s and early 60s, groups like the Beatles heard the call of rock and roll from overseas and made their way to the States. Many of the artists that came to check out the scene were from England, and so this age of musical foreign affairs became known as the British Invasion. Then came one of the biggest innovations in electric rock history. In November of 1966, an attempted redesign of the Vox Super Beetle guitar amplifier at Warwick Electronics Incorporated and the Thomas Organ Company resulted in the first ever guitar pedal known as the famous wah-wah. From then on, modifications and innovations led to hundreds of genres and subgenres. With the artists of the 1970s came a wave of redefinition of music that literally distorted the sound of what was once the blues and changed it forever. This revolution was influenced and inspired by the disquiet amongst the people about foreign affairs, such as the Vietnam War, national affairs, such as the Civil Rights Movement, and, of course, drugs. And there was always a different drug for every decade. Drugs would turn out to be the inspiration for and demise of many artists. One of the most well-known results of these influential events is the psychedelic genre. One of the greatest pioneers of psychedelic rock was left-handed guitarist Jimi Hendrix, known for his innovative use of the guitar itself, as well as distortion and feedback to achieve a whole new sound that few had ever heard before. Many artists put their own variations, such as synthesizers and other electronics, to use to create new and unique music and usher in a new era. Occasionally, artists feel the sound they want, but may not necessarily hear it. This inspires many to digress and take a look at those who came before them. Since the late 60s, this trend has been popping up here and there, and even now, we are seeing a pattern of blues revival. Artists everywhere and of all different genres are going back to their like roots. It just goes to show that this entity we know as music is deeply rooted in time and artistry, and no matter where it may go, today's music will always stem from the good old blues.